I should have known better than to camp in the deep woods of the Ouachita National Forest. The forest doesn't wake up kindly after a long winter. It stirs and groans and stretches itself back to life, and if you aren't careful, it notices you. It was my buddy Paul's idea. "We'll beat the summer rush," he'd said. We both wanted something raw. Just us, the wild. We packed light. Just the essentials: tent, sleeping bags, a couple of knives, and enough food to last 3 days. No cell service where we were going, but that was the point. The first day, the forest felt normal enough. The trails were empty, the only sounds our boots crunching on last autumn's leaves. We set up camp in a clearing a few miles off the main trail, right by a slow-moving creek. It was a perfect spot, or so we thought. By dusk, the forest shifted. The temperature dropped fast, breath curling from our mouths in ghostly tendrils. The quiet settled in, heavy and unnatural. No birds, no insects, not even the rustling of small critters in the underbrush. Just us and the trees, standing in eerie, frozen silence. Then we noticed something, lying on the ground few meters away from our campsite. It was a sleeping bag. It was shoved halfway under a collapsed log, no footprints around it. No signs of a campsite. Just an abandoned sleeping bag in the middle of nowhere. Paul prodded it with a stick. "Jesus," he muttered. "What the hell is this doing out here?" I didn't like it. I wanted to leave it alone, but Paul was already squatting down, peeling back the zipper. Nothing inside. Just an empty, moldy sack. Still, it felt wrong. Like we'd touched something we shouldn't have. We left it there and made our way back to camp, but that empty bag clung to the back of my mind. That night, the wind started up. Not a gentle rustling, but something mean. It howled through the trees, making the branches groan. Our fire flickered gently. I barely slept that night. And morning couldn't come fast enough. We packed up, eager to move, but as we were breaking camp, we heard movement down by the creek. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I saw. A woman stood there, half hidden behind a tree. She was muttering to herself, rocking slightly as if caught in some unseen current. I froze. "Hey," Paul called. "You okay?" She didn't look up, just kept talking to herself. Something about bugs. Bugs in the skin, bugs in the trees. Then, suddenly, she jerked her head up, looking past us, deeper into the woods. "He's coming," she whispered. My stomach clenched. I didn't want to know who he was. Paul muttered something under his breath, something about getting the hell out of there. I agreed. We left her standing there, swaying, whispering, as we strapped our packs on and moved fast down the trail. We walked a few miles before we ran into trouble. Thick, thorny bushes had taken over the trail, so we had to cut through them with our knives. Then, we were almost back to the truck. I kept my eyes on the tree line. That's when I saw a figure. A man. Thin, twitchy.
His clothes hung loose on his body, and when he smiled, I saw teeth that looked
wrong. Too dark. Too rotten. He stepped closer, hands twitching at his sides. "Seen my girlfriend?" he asked. His voice was all wrong. Too high, too eager. "Nope," Paul said. "Haven't seen anyone." The man cocked his head. His grin widened. "You sure?" We were in conversation with me. Then suddenly a scream tore through the trees behind him. A sound so sharp and raw, it made my knees lock up. The man didn't react. Didn't flinch. Just smiled wider. "Guess I should go find her," he murmured, and then he turned and walked slithered back into the woods, disappearing into the blackness. Paul started the truck and drove away from the forest as fast as he could. A mile down the road, we saw the same women that we noticed earlier. The woman, standing stiff in the ditch, eyes wide, and beside her, the man, smiling still with his rotting teeth. The whole trip was terrible, and the vibes were off. That couple gave us a strange feeling. They didn't seem like normal campers or hikers. They were wild, and something about them felt off, almost like they weren't in the right state of mind. I don't know what their intentions were. I never went back to that place. We changed our camping spot, but sometimes I still remember the scream. It left me with a terrible feeling. The idea of camping alone in the remote forest had always been appealing. No permits, no crowds, just me and the wild. After a bad experience, unknowingly setting up camp on private land before, I was more cautious this time. I drove deeper, past the well-known sites, further into the kind of woods where no one would bother me. The thick, unbroken forest of the Allegheny National Forest promised solitude, pure isolation, miles away from the choking filth of civilization. Just me, the fire, and the whispering trees. The first day went like any other. I parked at an old, unmarked logging road, hiked deep until the trail was just a suggestion, then set up camp in a clearing surrounded by towering hemlocks. The only sound was the distant call of a barred owl and the occasional rustling of unseen animals in the underbrush, the kind of quiet that lets your mind settle. It was the second afternoon, and I was gutting a fish by the creek when I heard something heavy, crunching steps through the dead leaves. Not the casual noise of a passing deer. This was deliberate, human. I looked up, and there, a tall, gaunt man in a filthy brown jacket, standing about 20 yards off, just staring at me. "Can I help you?" I called out. He took a step forward, his expression twisted like he'd already decided I was his problem. "Why you taking pictures of me?" "What?" I frowned. "I'm not. I don't even have my phone out. You was back at the road. I saw you watching me, following me." I let the silence stretch between us, slow and tense. He was twitchy, his fingers clenching and unclenching. Something about the way he stood too still, too eager, set every instinct on edge. "I don't know what you're talking about." I flicked the fish guts into the creek, wiped the blade against my jeans, and stood up slow. I could feel the weight of my hunting knife, the reassuring presence of my hatchet by the tent. I wasn't unarmed. He stared a second too long, then spat into the dirt and turned away, shoving through the brush with sharp, jerking movements. I should have packed up right then. I should have taken the hint, but I didn't. Night came fast. The fire burned, making shadows on the trees. I sat close, sharpening my knife and listening. The forest sounded different at night, full of creaks and faraway howls. But tonight felt wrong. Too quiet. Too tense. Then I heard a twig snap. A branch, somewhere in the dark beyond the fire's reach. I tensed, fingers curling around the handle of my blade. Another step. Closer, this time. I rose, slow, scanning the tree line. Nothing. The dark was thick, suffocating. The fire hissed as a gust of cold wind pushed through the camp. Then, the distinct click of a camera shutter. My blood turned to ice. I spun, eyes darting through the blackness. My pulse slammed against my ribs. The sound came again, a little to the left, like someone was standing just beyond the firelight, capturing me in grainy night vision clarity. "Who's there?" My voice was all sharp edges. Silence. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it into the trees. The beam goes through the dark, but found nothing. Then, again, the movement. A figure just at the edge of my vision, slipping behind a tree. The bastard was watching me, recording me. My breath turned hot with anger. "I see you," I shouted. I took a step forward, but the figure vanished deeper into the woods. Then nothing. I stood there for a long time, staring into the black void between the trees, waiting for another sound, another click, another reason to hunt him down. But nothing happened after that. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was packing up and getting the hell out. But as I stepped away from my tent, my stomach dropped. Footprints. Fresh. Circling my campsite. The bastard had been here while I slept, or at least while I pretended to. My heart pounded as I followed the tracks back toward the tree line, my grip tightening on the knife at my hip. And then I saw it. Hanging from a low branch was a Polaroid picture of me, taken from the tree line. I tore it down, my hands shaking. The rage surged so fast it almost drowned out the fear. "All right, you hell," I muttered under my breath. "You want to play?" I wasn't running. I wasn't cowering. If he wanted me, he was gonna have to face me. The day dragged. The sun barely seemed to move. I sat by the tent, waiting, sharpening the hatchet in slow, deliberate strokes. Then, just before dusk, he made his move. The sound of something crashing through the brush. Quick, sudden, aggressive. I stood, ready, as a rock flew from the trees and landed inches from my foot. Oh my God! Then he stepped out. The same gaunt, the same wild man, glassy eyes. But now, his face was stretched in a grin that didn't belong to a sane man. Still following me? His voice was all gravel and venom. I took a slow step forward, my hand tightening around the hatchet. "You've got 3 seconds to get the hell out of my sight," he chuckled. A low, wheezing sound. "Nah, I think I like it here." Then he lunged. I moved without thinking. The hatchet was up, ready, but he jerked away at the last second, stumbling back, hands raised. All right. His grin twisted into something else. Something desperate. "Just playing around, man." I didn't move. I kept my eyes locked on his. Then he took a step back. Then another. And then he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire roaring, my back to the tent, my weapons close. By first light, I was packed and gone. The whole hike back, I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see that sick grin peering at me from behind the trees. I made it to my truck, threw my gear in, and locked the doors. I left the forest that day, but I didn't leave my trip out of fear. Instead, I faced him with everything I had: my anger, my courage, and my hatchet. If he had come any closer, I swear I would have struck him. But that bastard got away. Since then, I've been more careful about where I camp and hike. I was just a kid when it happened. A stupid, wide-eyed kid who thought the world was a playground. It was Christmas time, and we were camping deep in the woods, me, my buddies, and our families. We did this every year, our little tradition. We'd set up camp in some godforsaken patch of wilderness, miles from the nearest town, no cell service, nothing but trees, and the occasional bear shit to remind us we weren't alone. But we had our walkie-talkies, bright yellow, sturdy little things. They made us feel like adventurers, like explorers cutting through untamed land. Our parents had their own set, a different frequency. If we wandered too far, they could call us back with the crackle of a button. It made them feel safe, made us feel independent. Stupid illusion. That year, the snow was thicker than usual, swallowing our boots with every step. We spent the afternoon goofing off, daring each other to jump into icy patches, climbing half-dead trees until the brittle branches cracked under our weight. Normal kid shit. The sun started dipping behind the trees, so we figured we had another hour before our parents would call us in for dinner. That's when the walkie-talkie buzzed. Static at first. Then, a voice. Ho, ho, ho. We froze. I remember how cold the air was in my throat, like breathing in glass. Santa? Jake, The youngest in our group clutched his walkie. The voice on the other end let out a deep chuckle, a sound that should have been warm, should have been comforting. But it wasn't. It crawled under my skin, slithered down my spine. You kids have been very good this year. We looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh or be freaked out. Kevin, always the boldest, pressed his button. Who is this? Santa Claus, of course, the voice responded smoothly. And I've got presents for you. But you have to come find me. Just keep walking north. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat pounding in your ears. Kevin grinned. Someone's messing with us. We wanted to believe that. Hell, I wanted to believe that. But something felt wrong. The voice wasn't playful. It was like creepy. It gave us creepy vibes. Jake, the idiot, was already stepping forward. North is that way. I grabbed his arm. We should head back. Kevin scoffed. You scared? Yeah, I was. But I wasn't about to say it. The walkie sounds again. Come now, children. Don't you want your presents? That was it. That was the moment my gut turned to stone. There was something off about the way he said children. Too eager. I slammed my finger onto the button. Who the hell are you? Silence. Then the voice, colder now, sharper. Keep walking north. Just listen as I say. We ran. No discussion, no arguing. We just ran. The campsite wasn't far, but the trees seemed endless, the shadows stretching, reaching for us. By the time we burst into camp, panting like we'd outrun the devil, our parents were already gathered around the fire. My dad frowned. What the hell's gotten into you boys? We spilled the story, the walkie-talkie still clenched in my fist. My dad's expression darkened. Without a word, he grabbed his own radio and switched to our frequency. Whoever this is, you're about 2 seconds from me calling the Rangers. No nonsense. The kind of tone that makes grown men flinch. Silence. Then, that voice again. Oh, I don't think you will. The air around us seemed to freeze. I swear, my dad's grip tightened on the walkie. Why's that? He growled. A pause. Then, because you can't hear me on your frequency. I watched the blood drain from my dad's face. Without a word, he clicked off the radio. And without another word, the walkie-talkies were taken away from all of us. We weren't allowed to leave camp again that trip. The excitement, the adventure, it was all gone, replaced by an unspoken unease that none of them wanted to explain. That night, I overheard the parents talking in hushed voices by the fire. If it was another camper messing around, why didn't we hear it too? Could have been someone with a separate radio, maybe trying different frequencies. Or maybe they had a scanner. Maybe they were listening to us first. The idea chilled me. Whoever it was hadn't just randomly stumbled onto our signal. They had tuned in specifically to us. We never went back to that campsite for a long time. No one said it outright, but the message was clear. Someone had been out there in the bush, watching, waiting. And that night, they had reached out only to the children. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted, we never found out. There's a kind of freedom that comes with being young, reckless, and a little bit stupid. Back then, camping wasn't about survival or preparation. It was about escape. A chance to be wild, to drink under the stars without a care in the world. No parents, no rules, no responsibility. Just us, the fire, and a case of cheap beer. That night started like any other. We loaded up the Jeep, grabbed our sleeping bags, and drove deep into the bush. The clearing we always used was nothing special, just a patch of dirt, surrounded by dry grass and scattered trees. But to us, it was a sacred place. The spot where we laughed the loudest, drank the hardest, and forgot about everything else. We didn't check the weather that day. Hell, I don't even think it crossed our minds. The sky was clear, the air warm, and the night stretched ahead of us like an open road. The fire burned bright as we talked, joked, and passed around a bottle. Time blurred. 1 beer turned into 3, then 5. Someone cranked up the music on a portable speaker, and soon we were dancing, howling at the moon, reveling in our own stupidity. Eventually, exhaustion hit. One by one, we collapsed into our sleeping bags, letting the fire die down. I remember looking up at the sky, at the endless expanse of stars, and feeling invincible. Like nothing could touch us out here. I was wrong. The first raindrop hit in my half-drunken state. I ignored it, rolling over and pulling the damp fabric of my sleeping bag tighter around me. Then another drop. And another. And suddenly, the sky opened up. Rain didn't just fall, it crashed down, soaking through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. I gasped awake, sitting up in shock. Around me, my friends were stirring, groaning, cursing as they realized what was happening. Within seconds, our entire camp was drenched. Lightning split the sky, followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder so loud it rattled my teeth. The wind howled through the trees, sending branches whipping and snapping. I could barely see through the downpour, but I knew we were in trouble. Someone screamed to run for the caves. It was our only chance. Scrambling to my feet, I grabbed my backpack instinct more than anything. I stumbled, slipping in the mud, my heart pounding as I tried to get my bearings. My sleeping bag was ruined, the fire drowned, our beer cans floating away. Nothing mattered except getting out of there. We ran, barefoot, blind in the rain, slipping over rocks and roots. The storm chased us. Every time the lightning flashed, I caught glimpses of my friends soaked, terrified, faces twisted in panic. We were small, fragile, completely at nature's mercy. Reaching the cave was like breaking through the surface after nearly drowning. We stumbled inside, panting, dripping, shivering from cold and adrenaline. The darkness was suffocating, the air damp, but it was safe. Safe from the wind, the rain, the madness outside. We just sat there, shaking, listening to the storm rage on. The reality of how fast things had turned hit hard. We had been so careless, so sure of ourselves, and in a matter of minutes, we had been reduced to nothing more than scared kids running for shelter. By the morning, the storm had passed. We walked back to camp in silence, taking in the destruction. Our sleeping bags were ruined. The fire pit flooded, everything we'd left behind either soaked or blown away. We packed up what we could. No one said much on the way back. That night changed something in us. We'd never again forget that out here. We weren't in control. The land, the sky, the storms. They ruled this place.